Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic for you today. Let's do it. Where's the creepiest place that you have ever been to? Please remember to like, share, comment, hype, listen and ask for shoutouts, and subscribe. The solitary confinement cells at Alcatraz, which is a pretty creepy place all on its own, but those cells are like the heart of darkness. There are 4 or 5 of them just off the library. All the cell doors open onto a windowless hallway, so it's dark leading to dark. I went in there on my own, and I swear something evil was squatting in the corner waiting for me to leave my soul unattended. 10 out of 10 for creepy. Will not go back. There's an abandoned mental hospital in my great-aunt's old neighborhood. We were at her house for Easter, and it was a nice day, so she suggested that we go for a walk. Looking back on it, I think that she walked there purposely. They had a playground, but all the equipment was made for adult-sized people. I started to play on it, and then had a what-the-f moment looking around. Like Alice in Wonderland, it was so bizarre, all overgrown, and then I asked what the building had been. Adults were having polite small talk and hadn't seemed to notice their setting. She explained what it had been, and adults looked kind of weirded out. I didn't see any ghosts or anything like that, but it was the most unsettling feeling. That was caused by a place. I went to a rest stop at 1 a.m. outside Springfield, Illinois a few years back. Went to the restroom and there was blood everywhere. It looked like something got slaughtered. I've never hightailed it out of somewhere so quickly beforehand. Update. So a bit of context. This occurred at a rest stop along Highway 55 outside of Springfield. This was a very old rest stop, not a gas station. It happened in October, maybe November of 2014, pretty close to Halloween. When I was a kid, we lived in my dad's old house from when he was a kid. It was one of the oldest houses in town and had been there since the 1800s, but had been redone a few times. The house had 3 bedrooms, a master that used to be a screened-in porch, a regular room, and a room off to the side that was barely big enough for a twin bed. When my dad was about 11, his older brother died of heart failure, and they had his coffin put in that room for the viewing. When my grandfather died about 10 years later, his was put there too. When I was born, my grandmother offered the house to my parents as she'd gotten remarried, so they took it for $30 a month. That room always creeped me out for some reason growing up, and I didn't like going in there. When I was older and renting the house from my grandma and myself, that's when my dad told me about the viewings. Still was a creepy room, and I kept only things I didn't use on a regular basis in there. One year I worked at a haunted house that was inside a building that used to be a funeral home. The morgue was downstairs and still had the drawers. My job was to lay in the drawer and pop out when people walked in by laying in a cramped drawer in the dark on cold metal with flashes of light and screams in the distance. Was probably the creepiest place. I scared so many people, including a middle school aged kid who straight up pooped his pants and a drunk college chick who peed, so it was kind of worth it. The crypt, I think that's what it was, of a church in Bayeux, France. I was there on a school trip, and we could choose whether to go to the historically old church or see the Bayeux tapestry. I chose the church. If I recall correctly, they had just found the crypt a couple of years before. So I was down there by myself taking pictures, and after a couple of minutes, I started feeling downright nauseous, like I'm going to get sick right here nauseous. Went upstairs to get some air and the feeling went away instantly. Creeped me out, and when I went down with the group afterwards, I felt totally fine. I was on a family vacation to Atlanta about 1972. We went to visit some cousins of my grandmother's, twin sisters, never married, in their 80s. The house was in a rundown neighborhood. From the street, you'd think it was abandoned. Overgrown yard, part of the roof caved in, boarded up windows inside. It was all antiques and furniture from the 30s and 40s, slowly deteriorating, and it looked as though they hadn't dusted in years. Wallpaper peeling, old portraits half fallen, looking up to the second floor from the stairs, just cobwebs and collapsed ceilings. They said they hadn't been up there in years, and definitely rat noises. They both looked and lived like ghosts and seemed half mad. Very civil and proper, but off. As an 8-year-old, I was terrified, especially when one of them joked and said, "You should leave him here. He can live with us." I burst into tears, and we left. More or less a combination of creepy and sad, but Cambodia. Went with family to see Angkor Wat, huge temple, an absolute marvel. Was featured in Tomb Raider, I believe, and stopped in town center for a bite to eat with our guide. We wandered away from the guide just to explore a bit, and we were approached by a young girl, 15 to 16, carrying what looked to be a sleeping toddler. She asked us to buy milk, a scam, for her baby, and we obliged because, hey, babies need food. Just as we were about to walk into the store, our guide spots us and tells us to get in his car. We used it for transportation to and from a bunch of temples. The girl then starts screaming profanities at us, and the guide and we pile into her car. She started banging on the windows of the car while still screaming after the door was closed, and surprisingly enough, the toddler still didn't wake up. We asked our guide what just happened, and he relayed this to us. Apparently in Cambodia and some other countries, gangs will profit off of not only sex trafficking from children, but also a form of pity trafficking. They will take a small child, toddler, and drug them so they look as though they're sleeping. They'll pass the child off to a young girl who will beg for food, money, etc., and pose as the toddler's mother. Then she'll pass the child off to a new girl who will repeat the act. They do this until the child wakes up, will feed them, and then start the process again. As the toddlers get older, they'll be taught to try and sell things to tourists. If they fail to meet a quota, they'll sometimes lose limbs, fingers, hands, arms, legs, and will then run a story about how they stepped on an old landmine. This is actually somewhat possible as the country is still reeling from the impact of Pol Pot had, and there are still unearthed landmines, but the issue is that less than 1% are close to the main city, or Angkor Wat, which is where a majority of these children were. We were shocked, to say the least. This seemed kind of far-fetched, but what else would we believe? We did some research online and found stuff about the sex trafficking, but not much about the toddler swapping and child mutilation. When we went into town the next day with our guide, what did we see? The same toddler being passed to a different girl, still knocked out, still in the same clothing. Definitely creepy. I loved Angkor Wat and thought it was beautiful, but I don't plan on going back there anytime soon. I've been to a good amount of creepy places besides my local Kings Park Psychiatric Center, which you guys should check out. I know I've talked about before. Kind of peeked into the catacombs in Paris, abandoned old battlefields in or around the islands outside of Japan, Okinawa, etc. I've never really felt or seen any presence besides living humans being, living humans. But these stories are fun, and I like to hear about new places that maybe maybe I'll go there one day. So, have a great day, guys. I had a friend who cleaned out and sold foreclosed homes for a living. He once took me on a ride to a house he had to photograph for the bank after it had gone into foreclosure. From the moment we got there, it was unsettling. It was in the area of a ski resort and the neighborhood was wealthy, but once we stepped inside, it was clear that it had been used as a kind of boarding house for resort stuff. Numbers outside each of the bedroom doors, large closets, weird spaces turned into bedrooms. The place was filthy with black garbage bags everywhere. Pizza boxes, booze bottles, like clearly a party house for staff, but recently abandoned. At one point, I was on the ground floor, and my friend was in the basement when I suddenly got full body chills. I was standing in the kitchen, and there was a bathroom next to it with the door closed, and I somehow knew that there was someone hiding in that bathroom. At the very same instant, my friend called me down to the basement where he had found a back corner which had been converted into another sleeping area. There was a television still on, just showing static, and a kitchen knife on a crate next to the mattress. That was the moment I stepped directly behind my 6'4", 300-pound friend and told him we had to get the fuck out of there. I'm pretty sure the home was being used as an illegal boarding house for undocumented resort workers, and I honestly felt bad for the terrified kid who was still squatting in the basement. But I sure as hell didn't want to find him. My old house. About 5 years ago, I was living in a town just out of Washington, D.C. The house was a short 2-story house with a basement that was built in the 50s. The whole house has a weird vibe to it, not exactly scary, but unsettling. In 2011, the year that we moved in, the guy that built the house stopped by. He told us that he built the house with his dad and 3 brothers in 1952. During the building, they found a few skeletons while they were digging out the driveway, and of course called the police. Turns out the bodies were Union soldiers from the Civil War, who had most likely been killed during the Battle of Bull Run and buried as the Union Army marched back to D.C. Also, the basement was unfinished, flooded constantly, and had a spricket infestation. In high school, my friends and I would go up to the local abandoned state mental hospital to explore. The rooms were mostly creepy from the state of decay they were in. There was a lot of graffiti with things like 666 and band names, Tool, Marilyn Manson, spray painted on the walls. The graffiti wasn't creepy, just markings from other teenagers. Sometimes we would find bullet casings scattered on the floor. However, the creepiest area I saw were the underground tunnels. A security guard caught us on the property and told us to come back in half an hour. After the stadies did the round, we met up with him and he took us down into the tunnels that staff would have used to travel between buildings. I just remember how dark it was, and he was the only one with a flashlight, as the cell phones at the time were Nokia bricks. The other creepy part was when he drove us around the property in his Dodge Caravan that had his cat in it. Dry cat food was all over the floor. 16-year-old me was really stupid. Even though nothing bad happened, it always sounded like the makings of a horror movie. Forest Haven is an abandoned insane asylum in Maryland. It's posted no trespassing and technically patrolled by guards, but in reality is very easy to get into. I was there 2 weeks ago with my SO, exploring and taking photos. There are 22 buildings on the property, all just wide open and abandoned, covered in collapsed ceiling tiles, broken glass, and graffiti. There's still furniture in some of the rooms, and if you delve deep enough into the property, you can still find patient records that were left behind when they closed. We actually found a stack of patient files in a dark windowless room. It was so surreal reading about a severely mentally retarded man with a history of schizophrenia who talks incessantly. This patient had a 1-page handwritten summary for every year that he had been in the hospital, and they all started out the same. Kenny is an almost 45-year-old white male with severe mental retardation and a history of schizophrenia. He has been at Forest Haven for 5 years. Only the age and duration change from page to page. The first one is dated 1973, and the last page in his file is a printed memorial flyer showing he died in September of 1990. The facility was ordered to close in 1974, but didn't actually close its doors until 1991. In its last year of operation, there were 9 deaths at the asylum. Kenny was one of them. The creepiest part? The patient, whose file I randomly opened up to in the middle of a stack of wet, moldering files, sitting on a corner of a collapsing desk in an interior room of an abandoned basement, he shared the same first and middle name as my SO. Just a weird, creepy coincidence in a cold, wet, creepy place. Ernestine and Hazel's in Memphis. Old blues bar that Ray Charles played at back in the day, and prior to that was a brothel at one point ran by 2 sisters, Ernestine and Hazel. Later we find place is reportedly haunted. We had a few beers and ate possibly the best handmade hamburger I've ever had. We venture upstairs, which still looked like an old boarding house with dark-colored bead boards on the walls and ceiling. It was darkly lit with empty rooms filled with dim-colored lights, broken pianos, jukeboxes, odd furniture, broken desks, etc. The upstairs bathroom had a clawfoot tub with a single red light bulb in there. It felt like a murder scene. We were buzzed, but I still felt a bit uneasy up there. There was one door closed, and you could tell someone was in there. Figured it was the office or something. The end of the hallway had a upstairs bar that we chilled at for a while and left soon after. A few months later, I read about the owner who lived upstairs and was probably who I saw that upstairs room committed suicide in that very room. It was a very cool place, but I will probably never go back in there. My house. The guy who lived here last was super into DIY home renovation shit. except he wasn't very good at it. Our basement has 3 sections, one being regular basement with like a washing machine and a dryer and stuff. The second section is a little workshop area. Where we toured the house, there was a lot of studded collars in there. The third section is where the shit gets terrifying. The guy who lived here last put a hot tub in the basement. There's already one on the desk. And he built a room underneath the desk and he put in another hot tub. It didn't work very well because he was shit at building, and so it's a dark room painted all black with a hole in the middle where the hot tub was. There's mold growing everywhere. There are 3 doors that don't open with what look like small bones coming out from under. There's also a shower. Pretty sure this is where the guy kept his dead bodies. Also, there's nearly 45 light switches in the house, half of which do absolutely nothing. Also, all the walls are painted lime green. I have one more creepy thing. I live in a very sketchy town. When I was in middle school, my walk home took me through the roughest part of town. Boarded up houses, weed growing operations, crack houses, and constant fighting on the streets. The one house that I always walked by had always given off a really creepy vibe. The grass was always dead, windows broken, etc. One day when I walked past, they had their curtains drawn back, and there was a guillotine in the window. Like a full-sized guillotine with a blade and everything. Freaked me the fuck out. Back during Vietnam, my unit got hit hard in the jungle. We split, and one group went to help find the VC who attacked us, and we stayed behind to evacuate the wounded. The 4 able bodies were supposed to hop on with the injured and go. We load up and one chopper doesn't make it back, so we 4 can't load. We would be grossly overweight. Its late son, his low pilot, says he will drop these guys and come back for us. So we divvy up ammo from the wounded and squat in an open field. 20 minutes goes by, then an hour, 2 hours. It's now pitch black, and we're seated in a grassy field. We spend the whole night looking at every stick and leaf that twitched. You could feel the tension. We sat in a star, back to back with our rifles pointed out. We knew we couldn't repel the attack, but we decided to take as many as we could before being overrun. If overrun, we would pull grenades and do everyone in the VC for 25 feet in every direction. The tension was thick. Sunrise, we heard the Huey come. On the way back, he had hydraulic issues. They worked all night to fix it so we could go get flown out ASAP. All 4 dust-offs had issues and took bullets, so that is why the other one didn't return the first time. That field of grass was extremely spooky, even if it was just in our minds. I reopened to a similar question a few months ago that was directed to police officers and our creepiest experiences, and I responded with a story about a pedo that I caught trying to break into a rural home occupied at the time by 2 teenagers whose folks were out of town. Up until 2 months ago, that was the creepiest event I had experienced, but I recently experienced the creepiest place I'd ever been, as well as the creepiest experience I've ever had. So my fellow constable and I had a lunch break at the same time, and we met up a little rest area off one of the county line roads. Window to window, typical cop shit, and we're chatting and eating. He tells me he got the new set of spike strips for stopping fleeing vehicles, for those that don't know, and he's like, "Oh, come look, they've got better egress handles." I pull a bit so I can get out of his truck, and he shoves me, and we're admiring the new kit, and I don't know why the hell he noticed this, but for some reason there were human tracks leading into the wooded area off to our right about 5 meters away. Just beyond where the trees start, there's a barbed wire fence, and the area is provincial property and it's not accessible to the public. Reason being, there's an old abandoned mining town down about 10 minutes into the woods. We radio about possible trespassers as we go slogging into the woods. We get there and this place looks like some shit out of the episode of Looney Tunes where Bugs Bunny and Yosemite Sam are braving the Klondike Gold Rush, only creepy and, well, empty. Tracks lead toward the mine itself. Of course it does, why wouldn't it? We get to the mine entrance and waltz in like we own the place, and there's this old chain and shit hanging from the ceiling of the cave, and it smells like ammonia from animal piss. Bunch of old wooden construction stations strewn everywhere, creepy. Yeah. Well, then we turned the flashlights on, and both of us nearly shat a sea turtle. There were 4 mannequins in Native American garb in a semicircle around a dais with some sort of bovine skull and just a bunch of charred wood and shit laying around. And the mannequins were painted with eyes and such. No people around, though. I guarantee you the screech we heard was from the wind passing through a crevice in the cave wall behind us both. Again, nearly shat a marine reptile. Decided this day shift can deal with this crap. Yeah, anyway, that was the creepiest crap I've ever experienced. Maybe it wasn't even that creepy. Maybe I'm a little bitch. All I know is it startled the piss out of me. I was working at the Livingston Mall in New Jersey at Toysam in 2011 or 12. This mall is dirtiest behind the scenes. It was supposed to be a mall for the rich, as Livingston is full of rich people, but no one came because they were going to the vastly superior Short Hills Mall. Nice place. Anyway, one of my things is exploring new places, and this was the first time I was able to explore this place. We had pallets that we needed to get rid of too, and my boss gave me the job of making them disappear. So anyway, one day I'm traversing the labyrinthine back halls of this place, and I come upon a door that seems to be in a weird place. I open it up and peek inside, and it's like a 3 by 11 foot mini hall, maybe a bit longer. In it is a long series of shelves with nothing on it, and it seems like this may have been part of something at some point. Then there's leaves on the ground, roaches, both living and dead, on the shelves and floor, and a set of overhanging tube lights that had, at best, 3 semi-functioning bulbs, casting a pale, eerie glow from them. Of that, there's chains hanging off of them. This thing looked and seemed straight up out of a horror film. Amusingly, my boss, when I told him and showed him the place, said, "Why am I not surprised you found a place like this?" Because I knew I liked exploring, and it's just something I do. Never found out what that place was for, but it did make a good place to shove some wooden pallets. In rural Missouri, back in high school, there was an old abandoned house on a country road that everyone had heard rumors about. The dad murdered his whole family inside and then shoved them in refrigerators, or back in the 30s, the son would murder his classmates on the way home from school. So naturally, my friends and I decided to go check it out. The front porch was mostly all caved in, but once we got inside, it was very bizarre how abandoned it truly was. There were newspapers and pieces of mail from the 50s. This was in the early 2000s, and mattresses with what looked like old blue blood on them. The kitchen had an old fridge, so I took a photo of it. Then the room beside the kitchen had another fridge and 2 large freezers. There was a pair of overalls hanging on a door. It was mostly trashed and pretty creepy, since we had to rely on our flashlights and we were all feeling super creeped out by the multiple antiqued refrigerators. Once back in the car, we went back through the digital camera that I used to take several photos. Almost all of the photos had these very prominent orange-yellow streaks, and on one of the photos of a refrigerator, there was a perfect orange orb circle outline. We noped out of there, but that wasn't the last time we went in there either. I investigated a fatal fire in the middle of nowhere in the woods. This house was set off so far into the woods, it took me forever to get back there on a dirt road. I pull up in front of the house, and of course, the whole thing is boarded up, but the house is huge and old. I got creepy feelings just looking at this place. The front door was boarded up with a bit I didn't have, so I had to climb through a window in the back the family had left open. As soon as I stepped foot in the house, I felt like everything was wrong. I shouldn't be there. I shouldn't walk around, and I sure as hell shouldn't take pictures. It was that feeling like when someone is mad at you and the slightest thing will set them off, so you just kind of sit there in silence, hoping they'll forget you exist so you can do your thing. But I was there to do a job, and so I started to do my walkthrough and take photos. This was clearly a set fire, and the guy who died had been murdered by his grandson. But I still had to document each area of origin thoroughly and do diagrams and all that, because fatalities are a big deal. The entire time I'm walking through the house, it feels like there's someone standing behind me, looking for me to slip up just once. Like when your boss is there the one time and he's just staring at you, waiting on you to f up so he can correct you. I finished the first floor and headed down into the basement where the guy had died. It was mid-July and it was hotter than shit on asphalt. But as soon as I got to the basement, it was like somebody turned on the AC. Of course, it was pitch black in the basement because A, it's a basement, and there's not much light down there on a normal day, and B, that's where the bulk of the fire was, so everything was pitch black. I walked through the basement into the bedroom. The fire hadn't reached the bedroom as it had been started at the stairwell, which acted as a decent chimney to prevent fire spreading throughout the basement. But it did get hot enough in that room that the outline of the guy's body was in the carpet right next to his dog's body's outline. As soon as I entered that room, every single alarm bell in my mind was screaming, "Get the fuck out, you moronic jackass. Have you not seen a goddamn horror movie?" This is where the angry ghost of Gramps murdered you with a hatchet. But I had a job to do, so I stayed. Took my photos and collected samples, searched the whole basement for anything to give an idea why this would happen. I frequently had to leave the basement to go outside to give my brain time to stop freaking the fuck out. And every time I walked back into the house, everything in me was telling me to leave. The whole time I was in the basement, and it was like someone was standing in the corner just watching me. And of course, I was working by my tiny-ass flashlight that's basically useless, so that didn't help much. The last time I left the house, I crawled through the window and noticed that it had gotten cloudy and really windy while inside. Thinking it was the window, and noticed that it had gotten cloudy and really windy. Thinking it was a random Midwestern storm, I walked around the deck and looked out into the yard to find a buck just fucking staring at me. I'd never seen a deer look angry, but it just looked furious. I just kind of shrugged my shoulders and half waved, and it turned and walked away. As soon as it walked away, the wind died and it started to get warm again. Creepiest house I've ever been to, and weirdest shit I've ever experienced.